Hey there, VBS Kids. You've made it to chapter 2 of our Who Was David book. Follow along with me with your finger or your good reading eyes as we read this chapter together. Let's start on page 17, 1-7. Saul kept David with him instead of letting him return home to Bethlehem. A man named Jonathan, who was the king's eldest son, befriended David during this time. Saul sent David on many missions. David was very successful and was given a high rank in the king's army. All the troops were grateful for David's promotion. The Bible says that one day when David was playing music, an evil spirit came over Saul, that's the king, and he tried to throw a spear at David. But David, let's turn the page to 18:1-8, was quick to move out of the way. Saul soon became afraid of David. He put David in charge of 1,000 men to lead into battles. David had success in everything he did because the Lord was with him. We find that in 1 Samuel 18:14. The Israelite people, that's God's people, continued to love David because of his great leadership. Saul, the king, became very worried that David would take his throne, so he tried to trick the young man. He wanted David to marry his older daughter, but David didn't feel worthy, so the marriage never happened. But Saul wouldn't take no for an answer. He offered his other daughter's hand in marriage. Let's stop right there. And before we leave page 18, look up at the gray box on the top left. It says clues, C-L-U-E-S. It says, soon the people were praising David more than they were praising King Saul, and this made the king angry. He kept a close watch on David to make sure he didn't take more attention from the king. Okay, let's get back to our story, down to the bottom of page 18, and then straight over to 19. There's only 3 words in 18. Ready? Saul had his, over to 19:1-9, attendants, who are helpers, talk to David to try to convince him to agree to the union of marriage. But again, David said he wasn't worthy of marrying the king's daughter because he was a poor man and little known. 1 Samuel 18:23. Saul couldn't believe David's refusal because he wanted David to obey him. The king tried sending David back to battle, hoping that the Philistines, the bad guys, the ones where Goliath came from, would take his life. But nothing went, turn to page 20, the way Saul wanted it to go. Let's pause and go up to the top right corner of page 20, where it says clues, and let's read that box. The king's plan continued to backfire. The more David battled the Philistines, the more success he had. As a result, David became more and more popular among the people. So Saul stopped trying to come up with different ways to hurt David. His new plan? He ordered his son Jonathan and all of the servants to take David's life. Uh-oh, spoiler. Okay, back over to the second sentence in page 20, top left. See where it says David, D-A-V-I-D? David eventually married Saul's daughter, and Saul realized that the Lord was with David. The Bible says that Saul remained his enemy the rest of his days. That's sad. 1 Samuel 18:29. Since Jonathan was David's friend, remember that's the king's oldest son, He told him of his father's plan to take his life. Jonathan told David to hide and also said that he would talk to Saul, his dad, in hopes of helping David. Jonathan, the son, told his father that David was a good person and that David hadn't done anything wrong. In fact, he said everything David had done actually helped Saul. On over to page 21, 21, sorry, right side. The king heard of his son and came to his senses. He promised he wouldn't do anything to harm David. But as time passed, once again Saul tried to harm David with a spear. And yet again, David was quicker and avoided getting hurt. After this incident, David escaped the castle. Saul was furious, which means very angry, and sent men to David's house in Bethlehem. But David's wife, Michal, warned him of her father's plan. Remember, she was the king's daughter. After David ran away, Michal took a statue and put it in David's bed. She also covered the idol with some clothes and even put goat's hair at the head. This comes from 1 Samuel 19:13. On page 22 now, 2-2. First, let's read the gray box, the clues box. Clues. A prophet was a person chosen by God to speak for him. They would tell people about God and what he expected, and they would remind people to obey God and to worship him with all their hearts. Saul's men were overcome by God's Spirit, and they too began praising God with the prophets. A prophet is a messenger of God, right? A person. We are at the top of page 22 now. The king sent men to capture David, but his wife, Michal, intercepted them and said that David was sick. Saul wouldn't be defeated and sent his men again to bring David, sick or not, back to him. That's when the men found the statue instead of David. Saul asked his daughter why she had deceived him or tricked him. She said that David threatened her, even though it had been her idea to help him escape. Meanwhile, when David fled, he found Samuel. Do you remember Samuel from chapter 1? The prophet who God had choose the next king, David. You remember that? He found Samuel and told him everything that had happened with Saul. Then the two of them went to a town called Naioth, about 5 miles northwest of Jerusalem. Not, top of page 23, 2-3, long after the king learned where David was and sent men to capture him. The Bible says that when Saul's men arrived at that place where David was staying, they saw Samuel leading a group of prophets, messengers of God, prophesying, which means speaking for God. 1 Samuel 19:20. Saul heard of this and sent more men to capture him, but like the first group, they also joined in with the others and began praising God. Saul sent a third group of men, and they also joined the others and praised God. Saul decided to go find David himself. When he arrived, the king asked where Samuel the prophet and David were and was told to go to Naioth. Then the Spirit came over Saul, and he walked along praising God on his way to find David. Does that sound familiar? All 3 troops of men did the same thing. he found Samuel and kept prophesying, or keep speaking and obeying God, all that day and all through the night. This wasn't what the king had in mind when he went after David. The people were so amazed. They thought Saul was one of the prophets. Hooray! We did it! We read together through chapter 2 in the King's Service. See you next time for chapter 3, On the Run. I wonder what's going to happen next.